Taoiseach, I want to begin by welcoming developments for peace in Gaza, as I know we all do, and hope that we will see the start of a path to real peace for all in the Middle East. Taoiseach, I think we can agree we're all living in the real world, and in the real world it is, I think, a good thing that we're having a debate about energy prices. I think it's a good thing we're debating the cost of energy, but cost of energy is a misnomer, because the prices being inflicted by energy companies on households are reflecting practices of gross profiteering, and they're far detached from real costs. Energy providers are not behaving as though their product is a public good, and the true cost is being paid by hard-pressed families and households, people who are toiling through a cost of living crisis and who saw the budget come and go last week with, it has to be said, Taoiseach, almost no reprieve or relief for them or for their household finances. And that's why we see executives at the energy companies reaping record rewards. And just to remind you, Flowgas have hiked their prices by 7% after their parent company recorded operating profits of €820 million. Bord Gáis, after a year in which they made €75 million in profits, is adding €218 a year to the average bill. Pinergy almost 10%, despite having increased revenues by nearly 40% last year, and Energia increasing electricity prices by more than 12% after a €154 million in profits last year. Taoiseach, I'm reading this from a script because it has to be read into the record. Pushing more households into fuel poverty is a high price to pay for what is clearly the hoarding of wealth by energy companies. Yesterday and today, you've pointed out that energy credits are pocketed by energy companies, and that's why they needed to go. But your analysis misses the point about the support that households get from such credits. And the reality is that in last week's budget, you've pulled the rug from beneath thousands of struggling families as winter bites. And you have not used the time during which those measures were in place to bring in more sustainable supports. And that's why we're seeing so many households in arrears, Taoiseach, and that's the reality. For Labour, our support for targeted energy credits is grounded in reality, in the need to support ordinary households who are being punished for the failures of government to bring down energy prices. Your government, it seems, was well able last week to ignore economic advice when it came to tax breaks for developers and indeed for VAT cut for one sector, which will cost €681 million, without any evidence that it will save a single job or a single independent business. Yet when it comes to energy credits, a lifeline for people, it seems you're suddenly slaves to undergraduate economics. You say you want more efficient solutions, but Taoiseach, we in Labour always offer constructive solutions. Deputy Kieran Ahern has pointed out to you, under the EU electricity and gas directives, price regulation is allowed in exceptional circumstances, for example, to protect vulnerable customers. So why aren't you using that mechanism to rein in the greedy energy companies? Why aren't you using Section 10 of the Electricity Regulation Act 1999. Taoiseach, will you take the powers available to you to help struggling households with energy bills this winter? Taoiseach.
First of all, I understand the pressure on households and families as a result of energy price increases. We are living through a period of huge issues around energy ever since Russia invaded Ukraine in particular. And government has intervened, particularly at the height of that crisis, in a very substantial way. But retail prices are influenced by several factors, as you know, including wholesale energy prices and supplier hedging. And in Ireland, our long-standing reliance on fossil fuels, specifically gas for electricity generation, has been a driver of higher energy costs. That is a reality, Deputy, I'm sure that you'd have to acknowledge. It's a fundamental problem with our energy mix. And our location, as an isolated island, our low density and widely dispersed population also influences prices and has necessitated a very substantial investment in the grid. And the programme for government did commit to an independent review into the speed and level of pass-through from wholesale prices to retail prices, with an additional assessment of the overall price dynamics and an overall focus on the competitiveness of our economy. And so the Minister did establish the National Energy Affordability Task Force to identify, to assess and to implement measures that will enhance energy affordability for households and businesses while delivering key renewable commitments and protecting security of supply and economic stability. And that task force will be reporting or publishing an interim report shortly, and again look at measures to support customers throughout 25 and 26 and the forthcoming winter. But more crucially, will provide recommendations in respect of structural reforms which can be undertaken to reduce the cost of energy and electricity, because there has to be structural reforms. I know politically and everybody wants to have the usual soundbites and have a go at this and have a go at that, but it's a fundamentally structural issue we have and how energy market and prices are determined. And the Minister will continue in the meanwhile to engage with the companies, and we in government then will take measures to protect people, particularly those in the lowest incomes. Those on the highest incomes, you're saying we should still continue with the energy credits. You're not saying targeted.
You have your rebuttal in a minute.
You're not saying, you didn't say it there. That word wasn't used there. And you're playing to the gallery to a certain extent. But I do acknowledge the issue. And like you mentioned VAT reductions. It costs to keep VAT at 9%. And so we factor that into the next 5 years. And we should keep it at 9% in terms of gas and electricity. But there is a problem here. There's a huge issue here. And it's an issue, that we have to invest triple what we invested in the last 5 years in the grid over the next 5 years. So there's going to be more investment in the grid, which there simply has to be.
Thank you, Taoiseach.
In terms of guaranteeing energy security.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Deputy Bacik, now is your opportunity.
I absolutely reject the idea we're playing to the gallery. And with respect, what I've heard from you doesn't do anything for the 300,000 households in arrears with electricity bills, the 185,000 in arrears on gas bills. You're talking about reviews and task forces. I do agree structural reform is needed because, of course, what we're seeing is the liberalisation of energy markets has failed. Competition has not delivered fairer prices for consumers. Energy companies are not competing with each other to reduce prices for consumers. Rather, a price hike by one seems to be giving an excuse for a price hike to the rest. So we do need structural reforms, but where are they? Why aren't we seeing, for example, a levy on the profits of energy companies where they are not reducing prices to consumers? I've read you out the record profits that they're reaping, Taoiseach. Why aren't we seeing action by government to target them? Why aren't we seeing the sort of action I've listed to you that is possible under powers you have? And crucially, why aren't we seeing more action on a moratorium on disconnections? We've got for vulnerable consumers a moratorium from November to March. Why not banning all disconnections for all households for 5 months over winter?
As
a stopgap measure, while we're bringing in structural...
The Minister is working with the companies in respect of to help families that are in difficulty. In particular in arrears, in terms of the establishment of hardship funds, in terms of making sure that there won't be disconnections. And that's over and above the measures we've taken for the working family payment to increase the fuel allowance there and to increase the fuel allowance more generally. So the Minister is and has engaged with the companies in respect of those in arrears, and particularly in terms of no disconnections throughout the winter period.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Now,